This is Codified Wisdom. Sharp insights, no fluff, and real-world wisdom from leaders who want to get you further, faster. Now, here's your host, Eric Eager.
All right. Well, hey, everybody. This is another episode of Codified Wisdom, and, where we have some phenomenal people come on to just share their experiences so that the rest of us can, get further faster and learn from their experiences. And today I was able to track him down, man. He is all over the world. And my friend Ravi, and Ravi Hutheesing, he's going to tell me a story of it because he's had one of the most fascinating stories from where his life began to the impact he's having in the world today. And so I couldn't be more excited to have him share his story, because it's not one you hear every day, of where he started, and some of the life challenges, and then where he evolved to where he's at today, which we share a lot of the same passion for making a difference for kids. So Ravi, thank you for being on the show. Appreciate you taking time, and I'll just start it out with, take us back, take the listeners back, because I've had the luxury of hearing this, and it's so interesting. Take it back to when you're back in high school, and your family's direction of where they wanted your career path to go, to where your heart and desire was going, and just kind of walk us through that journey, and then we'll walk through this journey to how you got there, the journey and the stops and milestones to what you're doing today.
Okay, well, sounds good. Well, Eric, first of all, thank you for having me. It's always great to see you, and look forward to, I guess, chatting with, so to speak, your listeners. And we've all got stories, we've all got things to share, and it's always great. One of the things as a keynote speaker that I love to do is hang out with my audiences, because everybody's got stories to share, and I learn so much from my audiences. So, but my story, well, really, it begins before high school, but it led me to that critical moment of high school graduation, that I have a stepson that's going through that period right now. But I came from a political family, and my family was the first family of India. Jawaharlal Nehru, my great uncle, was the first prime minister of India. My aunt Indira Gandhi was a prime minister. My cousin Rajiv Gandhi was a prime minister. So we kind of grew up in this pretty intense family of geopolitics. And in fact, my father, prior to my being born, decided, you know what, I don't want to go into politics. I went through this fight for independence. I saw the struggle that my family went through. I'm going to go to the United States. I'm going to go to America and study business. And he became one of the first Indians to work on Wall Street. So I had this sort of weird background, because I had this political side to the family that I grew up in, a very global, very, family that was always trying to fight for what they believed was right, and did so on a big level. But then I also grew up in this Wall Street environment, so it was a pretty high pressure situation. I had two older brothers. They're 7 and 9 years older than I am. They went off to college when I was 11 years old, and I was home with my parents alone when their marriage started to fall apart. And as a result, they kind of forgot about me, and I got a little lost. But I got lost in my ideas and creativity. And the result of that was that I was struggling through school, never really liked school very much. And, as I like to tell my audiences, it's probably because I had a dream. I wanted to be Angus Young of AC/DC. I found rock and roll. So you come from this political family with a Wall Street upbringing, and all I wanted to do was be Angus Young of AC/DC. So on my 11th birthday, my mother bought me my first electric guitar, and I was ready to rock. I was sure that this was my path. Had bands in middle school, junior high school. But by the time I got to high school, I said, you know what, I'm just not into school. I want to drop out. But there were two reasons why I didn't drop out. I had two amazing music teachers, and they were the ones that encouraged me and supported my talent, nurtured my talent, which is one of the things I talk about in my book and also in my keynotes, is how important it is that we not only help students overcome their weaknesses, but we really recognize and nurture their strengths, their talents. So I was very lucky to have that. And, the result of that was that I stayed in school. I managed to get a great education, and then came high school graduation. My two older brothers already in business school at that point, getting their MBAs. And everybody was wondering what's going to happen to me, because here's this high school kid with long hair and just wants to play rock and roll,
Yeah.
from this highly educated family. At the same time, I had already started my first business. I had built a recording studio in my mother's basement by the time I was almost 17 years old. And so throughout my last year and a half of high school, I had clients, I had students, I had people coming in to rent my studio, and I was running a business. So my attitude when high school graduation came around was, it's not a question of am I college and career ready, which is something we like to say in academia.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, it was whether I'm college or career ready. And
Yeah.
I was career ready. But
Yeah.
in my family, you go to college. So I didn't have much of a choice. I had to negotiate with my parents a little bit and said, oh, and say, okay, I'll give it a try. I'll see if I can make it work. And if I don't, then we're going to have to renegotiate. And, if it doesn't work for me. So I was lucky enough to enroll and get into New York University. That enabled me to maintain my studio, which was just in the suburbs. I was also apprenticing in the big recording studios on West 48th Street in New York at that time. And I was just learning so much, but I quickly realized I felt that I was wasting my time at NYU. It just wasn't pushing me hard enough, to be honest. And I mean, it was pushing me in many directions I didn't want to go, but it wasn't pushing me in the directions that I wanted to go and that I felt were my strengths. So, many people in my position who are keynote speakers in education have that wonderful story of being the first person in their family to have ever gone to college, and it's a very inspiring story. My story is I'm the first person in my family to have dropped out of college. So,
So,
it's the opposite. So, I dropped out of college, but not until my father put me to the ultimate test. He said, okay, before you drop out of school, you have to do one thing for me. You have to write me a business plan. And this was a complete uh, uh, revelation for me, because nobody had ever asked me to articulate my vision and how I was going to do this. It was probably the single most important lesson anybody's ever taught me in my life, is to do
wow.
that, and to do that in the form of a business plan. And so I worked on this business plan. I presented it to my, Wall Street father, speaking in his language, basically. And he
Yeah.
looked at it, and he said, you know what, this makes sense. I'm going to support you. And so I left school early, but I hired my teachers anyway, privately. That was part of the plan, because I wanted to learn. I
Yeah.
just wanted to learn at my own pace. I needed to learn at my own, whether it's faster, slower, whatever it was compared to other students. I needed that personalized learning opportunity. And that led me, fortunately, the combination of all of those things, including having the studio in my mother's basement and maintaining that, enabled me to build a pretty good network in the music industry. And I was very lucky to land a gig in 1997 and became the guitar player for the band Hanson. That year, we went on to become the top selling band in the world. And it was crazy. And it was, I'm a talented guitar player, but it was really my network and my business skills that got me into the position that I needed to be in order to be able to live that dream.
Yeah.
And so there were plenty of guitar players and musicians far more talented than I am, that were unable to put themselves in those circumstances in order to have that opportunity,
Yeah.
and not only have the opportunity, but to recognize it and convert it into a reality. That was the training I got through that business plan, through the apprenticing that I did, through having the business in high school. And then, of course, obviously the general education as well. So it's not that I don't believe in university and I don't believe in school.
No.
I do believe in it, but I believe that we also have to make it and turn it into a system that works for everyone in a better way, and not just put
Yeah.
everybody through a standardized system that leaves a lot of people behind. Um, so, I had a wonderful time in the music industry, and
Yeah.
suffered the birth of the internet, which Napster, collapsed the music industry basically. And
Yeah.
we went down with the ship, so to speak. And I spent the next 8 years rebuilding my career until the global financial crisis of 2008, which sort of ended that. And that's when I
Yeah.
decided to pursue my other dream and become a pilot, which is something that I had always wanted to
Yeah.
do. My pilot's license, became an aviation speaker, which I didn't know was a thing. But it really got me into public speaking, talking about how much I was learning in the cockpit of an airplane. Because for
Yeah.
me, now, having been through everything that I've been through, playing Madison Square Garden, Bill Clinton's Christmas party at the White House, all these
Yeah.
amazing experiences in the music industry, I found myself alone in the cockpit of an airplane, realizing this is the greatest classroom I've ever been in. I'm applying everything
Yeah.
in an experiential way that everybody's been trying to teach me. You know, I often joke, I know somebody taught me trigonometry in high school, but I learned it in the cockpit of an airplane and I didn't know it was trigonometry. That's the point, experiential learning, right? And application. So that lasted for about 8 years. And then in 2015, I had an opportunity to go speak in Moscow and Shanghai. And in Moscow, I met at the same conference where I was speaking the cultural attaché for the US Embassy in Moscow. And he and I kept in touch, and a year later, he invited me back to Russia as an official cultural diplomat for the U.S. Department of State. And now this was not anything I ever
Right.
thought would appear in my resume. It was never, the direction I was heading, but it was somewhat fascinating to me because it's returning me to the political history in some ways of my
Yeah.
family, of the roots that I had. And so while this was an opportunity that presented itself, and I had never imagined that I would convert it into a reality. It was fascinating to me and reconnected me really with my roots in a way that I'd never thought. And it's all of these pivots that
Yeah.
happened in my life that, brought me into speaking and keynote speaking and education. Because what I realized is that education is not as successful as it needs to be for everyone.
Yeah.
And I started out my education speeches, at the very beginning, thinking about how education didn't work for me. It is so much evolved that I realized that in many ways it did work for me, and I'm focused on how do we accentuate the positive aspects of education in our public school system in
Oh,
order to
yeah.
work for more, because it's possible. We have great infrastructure. And so that's really led me to where I am today. I'm still giving a lot of keynote speeches in education. During the pandemic, I wrote the book Pivot,
Yeah.
Empowering Students Today to Succeed in an Unpredictable Tomorrow. And that's really the journey. And for me, the skill and ability to pivot is what I want to try to teach others because I think it's one of the most important things. We live in a time right now where we're educating students for jobs that don't even exist yet. So how do we prepare them for that unpredictable future? Well, we got to give them the skills to pivot. And if we do that, which basically means lifelong learning, if we give them that skill, they're going to be fine because they're going to be able to recognize these opportunities, prepare themselves for those opportunities, and then convert them into realities.
Man, so I can't tell you how many times I hear this, this story and the life lessons of where you're at today, and I'm always just fascinated, um, because and just educating our kids in this next generation is, it's so it connected us and that exponential learning of, you know, that in today's world, um, things are moving so fast and that, working with AI now, you know, um, I wanted to explore this a little bit with you and what
Mhm.
your thoughts are because what's going to happen, and, we're both of, a little bit older. Um, when Google and the internet was coming around, in education, they were all worried about, oh my gosh, this revolution of this ability to look up any answer to any question. How are kids ever going to learn anything? How are
Right.
they? And now we're entering this age of not only ask, but it can literally create the content for you. But I want to dive in a little bit more into that exponential, capabilities because to your point, and what I've seen, so many kids, and myself included, Man, I didn't know. You kind of graduate and you think you kind of know a couple of things. I kind of like this. And how many kids have you seen, and of all the opportunities that you've had to speak around the country, um, how many kids are they still seeing that graduate that are you know not really understanding either pathway, that just don't really understand, and we're all that way. Have
Right.
you
And
seen,
it's
has
not
that
just high
changed?
school. I mean, it's people are graduating university and getting a master's degree and still not knowing the pathway. We're seeing that more and more. And I would there's a few things. One is I think our higher education system in some ways is broken, and there's not enough commitment to developing those strengths, as I was saying, nurturing those talents.
Yeah.
And K through 12 is very much focused on graduating students into what I characterized just now as a broken system. So,
Yeah.
that that becomes part of the problem. And when I say broken system, it's because higher education has become a business. It's forgotten that it's in the business of educating in many ways.
Yeah.
We have unbelievable student debt that plagues our students. So
Oh yeah.
our students graduate with a tremendous amount of debt, an expectation of what they should be paid, and the employers are saying, "But why? You don't know anything, and you don't know what you want to do, and you have this gig economy mentality." And I can't retrain you for you to just leave and go to somebody else. It's part of our cultural shift, generational shift in the way that we're thinking. And so, yeah, I think, that's part of it. The other part of it is we're living longer than we ever did.
Yeah.
And if we're living longer, mathematically, it's fair enough to say, well, it's just going to take a little bit more time to figure out what you want to do because our lives are sort of being elongated, even though things happen more rapidly through technology. So we have more exposure to different things. We have more distractions. We have a longer time that we presumably have to figure out what we want to do. And that's coincides with the fact that we have a longer time to do it,
Yeah.
so ahead of us, people are working to, 70, 75. I mean, Warren Buffett is finally retiring. It's
And
it's just sort of a different world. And we live in this, okay, kids are living at home longer. They're just taking that time. So I think it's somewhat proportional and
yeah.
natural that we're in. It's not something that concerns me too much. Um,
Well,
but at the same time, the system has to adapt to it in a way that supports students rather than bankrupts them.
let's talk about, let's dive into, and I had an opportunity to read your book, and Pivot, back when we were, man, it just seems like a dream, or, the days of COVID. Um, you know, uh, the idea of kids shifting, because I mean, just to your life journey, you know, uh, I bet you if I went in the way, way back machine and went and pulled Ravi aside and said, "Hey, your life journey is going to end up here and here and here and here," you would have thought I was a crazy man and probably ran around, just ran around away from me screaming. How do you start to incorporate um, that skill set into kids now? Because I have the luxury of working very deeply in AI today, and I get to see what around the corner is coming. And you know the shift and the velocity of change that's going to be happening, it's going to be exponentially faster. So talk a little bit how you can help kids, and how could our education system almost get them life ready for pivoting, because today there's jobs that are there may get replaced,
Absolutely.
and it's a reality. We're already seeing it. Is that some of the mundane, um, repetitive jobs,
Right. Are
AI
mostly going to go
agents can
first.
replace, and now you're going to have to move to a higher level of thinking, and more relationships and more what I want to call soft skills. Tell
Yeah.
us a little bit more about how you think that you could help kids equip for all the pivoting that it's going to happen. And
Right. Well, you sort of hit the nail on the head there. And I think, one of the things that education is so focused on today, and I get asked about it all the time when people ask me to come and give a keynote at their events or do a school convocation for the beginning of the year, is AI, AI, AI. What do
yeah,
we do about AI? How do we incorporate? Everybody wants to talk about AI. What can you tell us about AI? And my biggest message to the education system is that we're in the business of HI, human intelligence. Let's not forget that. We spent most of the last century, training humans to act like machines, right? To be consistent, to be working in the factories, working to do that. And now we're training machines to act like humans, to be creative, to be more random. I believe in intelligence. I believe in human ingenuity. I
yeah,
believe that's what moves civilization forward. And, I think there's a lot of potential to still develop our human brains. We only use, a few
oh, yeah,
percentage points of it anyway, into making sure that we, I wouldn't say stay ahead of the technology, but lead the technology. We always have. And I believe we will continue to lead the technology. So, so the education system needs to stay in the business of human intelligence and make sure that we are developing those soft skills. And not soft skills is kind of a soft word in some ways. It sounds
yeah,
it sounds a little I don't know, sort of easy to just sort of brush it off and say, well, we're going to focus on the soft skills. Yes, there's communication, but
yeah,
there's some really important ones like risk taking. We don't
yeah.
teach kids to build a tolerance for risk. Our education system is based on achievement. It's based on getting great scores on tests. It's
Mm-hmm.
based on studying for standardized tests. And instead, school is the safest place to teach kids to fail and how to recover. So,
Yeah.
and how to build up that appetite, that risk, and that self-confidence. Those are the skills that I think keep human creativity and ingenuity ahead of the technology. So I think it's essential that we remember that it's developing the human mind and those soft skills and that tolerance for risk, because failure in every aspect of education is probably one of the greatest tools we have, right? And you can
Yeah.
use fail as an acronym, first attempt in learning.
Yeah. There you go. I've heard that
They're
multiple
stepping
times.
stones to success. Fail forward. We have so many phrases because it's true. But it's only true if we teach kids to take the risks, to fail, to learn from that failure, and to recover. That's the formula, I think, for success. And that's been proven, in
Oh, yeah.
many startups and businesses over and over and over. So instead of having people invest a ton of money and then fail at their business, I think we should let them fail in the school system, so to speak, not fail out of
Yeah.
school, but have those experiences as part of our education system. That's the key. That's the key to pivoting, is also to have that appetite for risk, that tolerance for failure, and that ability to recover from it.
Well, and then diving into a little bit, because anytime I get asked to talk to entrepreneurs and kids, I always say, okay, here's the code word I'm going to tell you. You always hear about innovate, innovate. Innovation is code word for failure.
Mm,
Is
right.
that how you innovate is you consistently learn, try, and fail, but you learn something from that. And
That's
I,
right.
I, I like where you kind of started diving into, um, you know, how do we compress the time? Because really, what I hear and what I've been able to see is that we get out in the real world and we gotta, hey, I try this and try this. I try different experiences to see what I like and what I'm good at, and maybe some things that I thought I liked and wasn't good at. And, do you have any thoughts of how you can condense that down, maybe with new technologies or new experiences to give kids a chance? in this, what I want to call safe environment. Like it's okay. You don't have family, you don't have rent, you don't have life
Right.
coming down on you.
Exactly. You have no
And
children dependent on you. You don't have, right. Mouths
exactly.
to
And
feed.
um, do you have any ideas of how you can get that down now into exponential where kids can try their desires or interest and start to kind of accelerate those life experiences and those exponential learning capabilities simply from the fact that they may not have exactly what they want to do, but at least they kind of narrowed it down a little bit to what they are looking at.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think part of the problem is just that there's so many options, there's so many things that kids are exposed to that it almost becomes confusing. So, I think one of the great opportunities in technology is to have better analysis, right? Better analysis of those talents, those strengths, those skill sets that kids have. Because I think in many cases, the formula is to match that passion with your natural talents.
Yeah.
And that probably will be the greatest contributors to being successful. If you
Yeah.
love what you do and you do it well, right?
Yeah.
So it's in that sense, it's not that complicated. So that's one of the main focuses in education, where I think technology can be very beneficial, is in the terms of assessment and
Yeah.
analysis of the students' abilities. And we do that. We have that. We have, strength skills tests and all of those types of things. But there's more and more ways that I think it can be effectively done,
Yeah.
especially with the technology that we have. So I'm not a big fan of rushing things. I wouldn't want to because there's I guess life is short when you get to a certain age, but in the scheme of things, life is pretty long. We've got a pretty
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
amount of time to
Exactly.
figure things out
Yeah.
and enjoy the different phases of our life. And but I think there's some critical. It comes back to the basics. Make sure you learn something new every day. As long as you learn something new every day, you're going to find something interesting and that sparks your curiosity. In the book, I'd say there's four pillars to lifelong learning: inspiring curiosity, nurturing talent, provoking critical thinking, and fostering communication. And I believe that if we make sure that the curiosity, which I consider a skill, it has to be something that we're constantly developing, is our curiosities. I've already talked about nurturing that talent. The critical thinking is more important than ever when we're dealing with technology and information. We need to make sure we know the sources of that information in order to be able to discern what's true and what's not, because it's becoming harder and harder, especially with AI. I mean, there was a time where the phrase, "Well, I got to see it to believe it," meant something.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's no longer the case.
Oh
You
my
can see
gosh.
it
Yeah.
and you can believe it, but it's false. So we didn't
Yeah.
have that before. So the critical thinking piece is extremely important. And one of the simple examples I use is what I learned in aviation. You never trust one instrument in the cockpit of your airplane. You always look at a minimum of three in order to determine what your airplane is doing. So I think it's critical that we have our students looking at a minimum of three sources of information always, in order to formulate an opinion and not jump to conclusions based on a headline or on something that they see that they maybe think is true. You got to dig a little bit deeper today in order to really know uh, what is real and what is not.
And
So that's the downside of technology, is it can be
yeah.
deceiving. But as long as we're continuing to develop the human mind and that critical thinking, it's essential. And then the fourth piece of that is the fostering communication. That's the soft skill, the relationship building, and to the point of this podcast, wisdom. There's so much wisdom in the world, and it's so important that our kids have the ability to talk to people who are unlike themselves, who are older, who have more life experience.
Yeah.
And I see that less and less these days. Maybe it's because of social
Yeah.
media. Maybe it's, I don't know all the contributors to that, but I certainly grew up in an environment where I was constantly around older people with more experience and more success than I
Yeah.
had. And I know that I've had the fortune that I've had uh, in my career and in my life because of those influences. So I'm very keen on making sure that young people have those influences. And I think schools are a great opportunity, for
Yeah.
that, because schools are places where you have people of all different ages working together. And one of the things I tell my audiences in schools all the time is we got to create the forum where kids can talk to adults who are neither their parents nor their teachers to
Yeah.
develop that appetite of risk of talking to a stranger. I
Yeah.
often say the worst thing we tell kids is don't talk to strangers. I mean, how do you get anywhere in life and create opportunities if you never talk to strangers? The art is teaching them how to talk to strangers. So that fostering communication aspect is a really critical part as well.
Well, and tell me a little bit more, because one of the things that, and the multiple stories, because I mean, we'd run out of time of all the incredible stories you can tell us. But tell us some of the stories about how you were able to take, in that curiosity, communication, putting those all to action of taking kids from completely different backgrounds and putting them in environments to recognize that they have more in common than they do in differences, and that the curiosity about knowing and learning from somebody else and what connects us all.
Right.
And
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that happened, it was November 13th, 2015. There were the horrible terrorist attacks in France, in Paris, where the radical terrorists went into nightclubs and cafes and restaurants and just randomly killed people. And I had already spoken in Russia at that point and served as a cultural diplomat. So I had some contacts at the State Department. So the next morning after that terrorism attack, I wrote to the contacts that I had and asked a simple question. I said, "What are we doing to inspire youth to rise above radicalism?" And somebody from the State Department got back to me and said, "Well, what do you have in mind?" And I didn't have anything in mind, but I said, "I'll get back to you in 48 hours with a written proposal." And I thought about it for those 48 hours. And I thought
yeah,
about what if we take a group of people from traditionally opposed cultures and religions, and we put them in a room together to write music for a couple of weeks. Some of this common language of music, yet we take people, that come
yeah.
from these not just different backgrounds, but backgrounds that are just, opposed to each other. And they liked the idea and they agreed to fund it. And we launched it in Jakarta, Indonesia, with 16 students, from all over the ASEAN region. So I had students from the Philippines, from Timor-Leste, from Indonesia, from, Vietnam,
Yeah.
Cambodia. And it was really fascinating. And when I think about the diversity of that group, I had one from Cambodia, one from um, the Philippines, and another from the Aceh region of Indonesia. That's a Buddhist, a Christian, and a Muslim writing songs together for 2 weeks in a room.
What?
And I mean, from day one, they became best friends, and they wrote some great songs together. And they're still, 5, 6, 7 years, whatever it is now later,
Yeah.
still writing songs together
Oh,
and
no way.
friends. And, you realize, first of all, how powerful the arts are,
Yes.
and whatever it is, whether it's music, whether it's food, but arts and culture are something that if we are successful at inspiring curiosity, our kids become more interested in our differences than concerned about our differences. And that's one of the things that I think I've been lucky to witness through these programs that I did. This one in Jakarta, Indonesia was just so eye-opening and incredible that we repeated it in Iraq with Iraqis and Kurds. We repeated it in Lebanon between Lebanese and Syrians. And so repeatedly over and over, I see these opportunities to create a forum where young people will discover that they have more in common than they have differences. I partner with a school in India for the poor, some of the poorest of the poor in the world. Um, it's a remarkable project. We take the kids out of the villages at the age of 4 or before the age of 4. We pay for their education through their master's degree. And, one time I was there and I flew immediately to Los Angeles to work with some kids in LA. And the kids in LA had so many questions about my new students because I told them about them. And I
Yeah.
eventually said to them, I said, do you guys want to do a video chat with the kids in India? And they said, yeah, we'd love to do that. Called the school in India. Do you want to do a video chat? Yeah, we'd love to do that. And, it was really remarkable because I was sure they were going to have nothing to talk about. So I scripted a 30-minute script so
Yeah.
that dialogue so that they could, at least have something to talk about. Well, within 10 minutes, they were off my dialogue. 90 minutes later, they were still talking. When they ran out of things to talk about, they were showing each other dance moves, and the whole thing ended with the kids in India beatboxing and the girls in Los Angeles dancing in real time. And I was just sitting there scratching my head like, not only how is this possible, but it was so easy. We just created the forum and the kids did the magic. And they found, because of their innate curiosity, they found their common interests. And I did a press conference right after that video event that we did
Yeah.
in Los Angeles. And the only thing that came to my mind at that conference is, is world peace, could it be that simple? Could world peace be this simple? Could
Yeah.
we let young Palestinians and young Israelis bond bond naturally before we teach them how to hate each other? Because that's
Yeah.
basically what we do. We teach people how to hate each other. And I've recognized this over and over and over through these various activities and programs that I've participated in or created. And I just see this wonderful opportunity for world peace everywhere I go.
Yeah.
Yet the forces that work against it are rather strong. And so one of the things that I hope to inspire in education, and especially in entrepreneurship, is that we encourage our young entrepreneurs to find a way to make peace profitable, because then I believe we'll have it. War is very profitable, but if we can
Oh,
make peace profitable, I believe we'll have peace. So I want young people to be thinking that way and to think about how do we make peace profitable.
well,
So,
that's, yeah, I was going to
that's where it's
say,
all led me.
well, and then let's dive into that, because what started that, and then we're gonna, you talked about risk taking.
Hmm.
Okay. Well, it was a risk to go to, the U.S. Department and say, hey, I want to take a chance and take kids from different backgrounds and different religions and put them in a room. I mean, did you evaluate the chances of it just turns into a big, yell fest at each other, and what the potential failure of doing that?
Yeah,
What?
no, I never even thought, no, I didn't evaluate the risk of that. I figured I could manage it if it were to happen, by separating people or, I don't know. I think to me, it just seemed, I've seen it over and over where music and the arts bring people together. And I was fairly confident that doing something like this, uh, that wasn't, I mean, it was risky, but it wasn't that risky because even though these people come from very different religions, and cultural backgrounds, we weren't in a war zone in Jakarta. Now in Iraq,
Yeah.
that was another issue. We were in a war zone doing this. ISIS had just been finally moved out of Mosul after 3 years of taking the city as prisoners. I had 4 students who were prisoners of ISIS in that program that had just been released days before we started the program. They were prisoners of ISIS because they were musicians. That was crazy, right? Because it was illegal to play music under ISIS. So, it was those I felt were real risks because we were in a war zone. People thought I was crazy going to Iraq, and I questioned whether I was crazy going there sort of voluntarily.
Well, I
Um,
mean, outside looking in, I'm thinking you're pretty crazy, but
Yeah, but
yeah,
I would go back any day. It was an amazing, amazing experience. Another one was in Lebanon where I wanted to go see the city of Baalbek, where the most impressive ancient Roman ruins outside of Italy exist. And everybody told me, don't go there. It's crazy. The road between Beirut and Baalbek is covered in Hezbollah. And when you get there, you're going to be on the new ISIS front, just 10 miles from the Syrian border.
yeah,
And this was a risk, and this was probably not a very smart one. but I wanted to go, and I found a driver who would take me. And we went, and sure enough, we got stopped by Hezbollah, and they got into the front seat of the car, and we drove. And I was 100% sure I was being sold as a hostage at that point,
Yeah, man.
and thinking it was the dumbest thing. And then the soldier got out, and he tapped his machine gun on my window. I rolled my window down, and he offered me a cup of coffee before giving us directions and sending us on our way, you know? And you realize, and this is something I talk about in my presentations all the time, that our preconceptions, you need to go through those experiences to realize that our preconceptions are often misconceptions. We can't, you sometimes just got to do it for yourself and take those risks in order to realize that it's not that risky. And one of the key parts to this story is that same day that I survived Hezbollah. It was not it was a very pleasant experience with this soldier. Made it to Baalbek. Nobody else was there because it was too dangerous to be there. And I'm sitting there by myself for hours with my driver, just enjoying this amazing ancient city. When my cell phone starts buzzing with breaking news of domestic terrorism in my hometown of Charlottesville, Virginia. It was the same day as Charlottesville. So you think about this perceived security that we have at home, although we know things are crazy today in the United
Yep.
States as
Yeah.
well. There's a lot of violence, horrible things going on. But we think of the Middle East and places like Iraq and Syria and places like Baalbek being the most dangerous parts of the world. But those are misconceptions. It really depends on what you put out there in terms of how dangerous things are, you
Yeah.
know? So I think those are some of the greatest lessons that I've learned is that there's no calculated risk that I shouldn't take. There are stupid risks that I shouldn't take, that no one should take,
Yeah.
in my opinion. But, when you calculate the risks and when you ask, even with the State Department, just pitching the idea to them, many people would be afraid, I think, to pitch such a concept to these, in theory, powerful, influential people,
Yeah.
and in reality. But what do you have to lose? That's the question I've asked myself all my life is what do I have to lose? Worst cases are going to say no. Now, what
Yeah.
do I have to lose going to Iraq? Okay, maybe my life, maybe a car bomb, maybe
Yeah.
something like that.
The
But
stakes get a little higher.
it turned out that I have a much higher chance of being murdered in Chicago statistically than I do in Baghdad. So,
Well, and diving into that a little bit more, uh, especially with the events of yesterday and some of the things um, going on, and that um, just people having conversations, and um, seeking understanding. Um, how can you translate that to kids that you know taking a risk to maybe walk across that classroom and talk to that kid that you may not know nothing about, or you may not understand or have a different background, but go start that conversation. And it's not life and death, but for a lot of people, they're shy. I don't want to start that conversation, and it's easier for me to stand on the sideline. Talk about even in those small steps, because I do have hope that of all the things that are dividing us, that again the next generation has an opportunity to um, have dialogue, have good conversations, but it doesn't mean that we're not all working together. That there's a we,
that's
that
right.
we can do these things together. You just have different opinions about how some things get done.
Yeah, and they're the most global generation. Each generation is more global than the previous one, and that's a lot to do with technology and our exposure to the world. That should lead us in a direction of global curiosity and cultural curiosity. I think it is to a large degree, and I will stand by there's two types of fear, right? There's the natural type of fear that makes us not touch the stove while it's burning hot. That's the kind of fear that keeps us safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
But then there's the kind of fear that's taught, which is to be afraid of strangers, and we shouldn't be. Um, when you see somebody that's different, that should inspire curiosity, not fear. And I think those are things that we can teach kids. And it's a tricky balance, you
Yeah.
because you don't want them to be trusting and taken advantage of and to be
Yeah.
harmed or hurt. The world can be a dangerous place. So that's where the critical thinking piece comes in and evaluating the situation that you're in, making calculated risks. But in reality, most of our shyness and fears, I think, are propelled by fear, and fear that's not necessarily justified. It's just something that has been passed down from generations to generations, which is a cycle that puts us
Yeah.
in a cycle of discrimination, a cycle, everything's cyclical, whether it's poverty or discrimination or racism. And I think in education, maybe it's our job, but it's certainly our opportunity to break some of those cycles. And we should embrace those opportunities, even though our political climate and social climate often doesn't support that idea and that concept. I'm on the position that, our diversity is an asset, and it's something that we should embrace and learn about, even if we don't understand it. I mean, whether it could be transgender or non-binary or any of these things that somebody of my generation or older may not understand. But one of the first things that I always tell myself is, um, whether I agree with it or understand it doesn't mean that I know everything. There's stuff out there that I don't understand, may never understand, but that doesn't make it wrong just because I don't understand it. For example, I should continue to try to understand the things that I don't understand. And so that's part of lifelong learning, is to uh, really embrace the things that you don't understand, try to understand it, and if you never understand it, accept that you're not always going to understand everything, and that doesn't make you right and the other person wrong. You know?
Well, I guess, man, like I always say, I could just spend hours talking with my friend here, just the stories and the thought process and the hope for the future. So, before we wrap things up, just looking forward, what gets you excited looking forward for the opportunities for kids with technology and some of the things they have that you and me didn't have growing up. Can you give some insight of what things you think are will get you excited about the opportunities for our next generation of kids?
Well, I mean, stepping back a little bit in technology, not too long ago, but this whole concept of what you and I are doing right now, video conferencing, has really changed the way that we function, has changed the way that we do business, has changed the way that we interact with people. And it's enhanced our opportunity to learn from people that are on the other side of the world without leaving our living rooms. So, technology in that capacity, I think, is very valuable to our cultural growth and our global growth and what students can learn. When it comes to AI, 3D printing, and the things that are moving forward, I find it absolutely remarkable that these things exist and that our students today are able to learn these technologies in order to make the world a more efficient place. These are all efficiency tools. And we have always been seeking efficiency tools. I mean, I recently built a house from the ground up, I mean, I didn't personally, but
I was
my
gonna say it
first
wouldn't
time.
surprise me. I mean, all the talent you've had before,
I was
guitar to
there
flying a
every week
plane.
watching the workers do it. But there was a day where we used hammers. Now we use nail guns. It's an efficiency tool. So, I look at all technology that way. I find artificial intelligence versus a Google search, that now seems like that was uh, years ago when, Google search was an amazing opportunity. We now have, chat GPT and beyond, far beyond that even now, at the speed that it's moving. These are efficiency tools. These are just incredible opportunities to continue to increase our efficiency. And I'm in favor of that, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm in favor of AI taking jobs. And people will look at me and go, "What are you, crazy? Why do you want, how are we going to eat?" And I said, "Well, we got to figure that out. We have to
Yeah.
figure out a system where technology is doing a lot of the labor and the jobs that we are currently relying on humans. And what does that do? That frees up a ton of human capital. So what are we in the education industry going to do with all this wonderful human capital? And how are
Yeah.
we going to develop the minds to create beauty, to create art, to create better relationships, to create world peace? I mean, let's just put it out there. There's no shortage of work to do. If AI takes all the jobs, there are still so many great things that humans can contribute to, the world. So we just have to figure out another means of how society functions, if it's not based on a paycheck anymore,
Oh, man.
and that's part of, I mean, that's a whole nother conversation, right? Of distribution of revenue and especially when it comes from technology and intellectual property and all, who owns the rights and how do we prevent that from creating more disparity rather than closing the disparity gap? I mean, there's huge, huge conversations to have. And I would love for us to be training minds to have those conversations rather than jobs that AI and technology can be doing more efficiently.
Wow. Um, well, man, it has been, as always, a great conversation. I know that, you know, uh, the people that watch and listen to this will also benefit from the. I've had the luck, been lucky enough to hear these stories, but now other people can hear these things. So, what I ask for people to do, at the end, if they want to learn more and want to maybe even have you come talk, in different capacities, how's the best way for them to reach out and get a hold of you? And then the second thing, what I always ask to wrap things up is that if suddenly these amazing minds that we're molding and creating for the next generation created a time machine, and you can go back and then more experienced Ravi could go back. Is there a point in time when you would go back and give yourself some advice on that would something you could have got further faster or calmed your nerves? What pearl of wisdom would you give yourself to have made things a little bit easier, a little bit faster along the path of your journey?
Well, let me answer the first question first because that's easier. People can reach me at raviunites.com. Ravi Unites, bringing people together. raviunites.com. And that's my handles on all social media as well, Facebook, LinkedIn, and email ravi@raviunites.com. So it's all consistent. I love to hear from people. I would welcome your listeners to reach out to me and tell me their stories or how anything that I've said today has sparked something that they would like to share, because that's how I get better at what I do. That's how I learn more too, is by listening to the people that listen to me. So I really do encourage listeners to do that. And same thing if as far as the speaking goes, I do a lot of education conference, all sorts of conferences. I'm doing an architectural conference in November. Partly because I built my house, I have a new appreciation and concept for that too. And my stepson just graduated from architecture school, so it's I've got something to talk about now with the architects. But the point is that a lot of what we're talking about applies in many, many different arenas of business and education. And I think we can constantly take these ideas and put them and implement them in various different ways. So I would encourage anyone from all walks of life to reach out and get the conversation going so that we can all get a little bit smarter and see if we can see how we can put these ideas into action and make the world a better place.
Yeah.
Now, your second question, that's a much harder question. The time I go back to, I suppose, is graduating high school. And I say that only because I did spend a little bit of time in a university system that I knew wasn't going to be right for me. Um, I wouldn't say it was a mistake. I'm glad that I did that process in order to be sure that that it wasn't right for me. I'm also glad because it resulted in my father forcing me to write that business plan. So it's very hard to say that anything was a mistake, and I would say that or slowed me down. It was the process I needed to go through in order to continue moving forward.
Yeah.
But I would say that the lesson in that is to always view those experiences in that way. They are the lessons that we need and the time that it takes in order to move forward. The only time that's wasted is the time where we're not learning from our quote unquote mistakes. Uh, every mistake can be turned into, an opportunity, and we should always be seeking those. So, really looking back, I think there's so many times in my life where I've said, I wish I did that, or I wish I'd done that, or I wish I had. But now, when I look back at all of those, with a broader perspective and see where it's all led, each one of those missteps that I might have thought at the time has been a contributor to where it's led me today, and I don't have any regrets about any of that.
Yeah.
So that's why it's a hard question to answer. It's not that it's all been
Yeah.
perfect and that I couldn't have done things better. I'm sure there are many things that I could have done more effectively, efficiently, and just
Yeah.
better. Um, but they've led me to where I am, and
Yeah.
and I can't fault that. It's part of
No,
the journey. So you embrace the journey,
I d-
and
yeah, maybe it's going back to younger self and saying, man, life's going to get you some pretty cool stuff and
yeah,
everything. So just enjoy it. Some cases you're going to be down, but all of it's a journey, and it's
yeah.
going
And
to
I
get
think
unveiled to you.
I think maybe one thing that came to me a little late in my journey was the idea of, but it didn't come that late, but the idea of paying it forward. That's a
Okay.
concept I really like. And I think that I try to instill that in people, in young people, and to recognize that, I'm at a stage in life where everybody says it's great that you give back,
Yeah.
but it's not about giving back. To me, it's always been about paying it forward. And I maybe wish I had understood that even earlier, that
Yeah.
there is so much value in giving, even when you don't necessarily
Yeah.
have everything,
Yeah.
because those create opportunities, also connections, learning opportunities, and just a better sense of the world around you. It's very easy to get caught up in your ego, to get caught up, especially
Oh
in
yeah.
rock and roll and with the band. I mean,
Oh yeah.
it's all about you. It's all about being the star and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But there's so much value in genuinely recognizing that there's a world out there that you can contribute to. It's not just about what can I get, it's about what can I give.
Wow. Well, with that, we went over a little bit longer than my usual time limit here, but I think people will hopefully benefit from the conversation. And I know there's nuggets and just pearls of wisdom all through this conversation. So again, thank you so much for your time. All right, for those that listen, and again, the whole idea is just hopefully you can learn lessons. Today's lesson is going to be paid forward, and then I appreciate everybody taking the time, and we'll catch up with next week's episode. And again, thanks, Ravi, so much for being on here, and we'll catch you next time, folks. Take care.
Thanks, Eric. Great being with you.
Thanks for listening to Codified Wisdom with your host, Eric Eager. Want more? Subscribe and follow Codified Wisdom on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast platform. To learn more about Eric Eager and how 4Impact Data helps leaders get further, faster, visit 4impactdata.com.